Down to our discussion right now. This is what is on the front page of the Daily Nation. If you may just grab a copy of the Daily Nation, killing children. And what I'm holding this morning is what has killed, 8 of our children today. Right? You can see these were some exhibit from the raised down structure of the Precious Talent Academy. I want my partners to feel the weight of this, because this is a weighty issue. I'll pass it along from Otene Molo to Amatangi, because you're the legislators that can help us on this. My question that I can begin with is the Physical Planning Act or the bill itself. I wonder where it is. Is it a bill? Is it an act? You can tell us. And with the Physical Planning Act, what does it really encapsulate in light of what we're going through, especially with this chilling story that we have, right?
What I've seen in my county, when a construction is going around, there are the county officials going around collecting money from the construction for levies and so on by the county, but they don't actually inspect the building itself to see whether it's sound. So there is a problem in that. But having said that, I think it is tragic that a whole ward in that constituency did not have a single public school. I think with a year's allocation of CDF, one can buy land and build a public school. I think it's tragic. And actually these parents were responding to the fact that there were no public schools, so they had no choice but take their children to this school. I think it's a deeper rot than we are looking at, that needs to be looked at from all angles. The construction of the National Construction Authority, allowing that building to stand, and how come that a whole ward has no public school.
Yes.
And this is a tragedy throughout Nairobi, in the sense that the public schools in Nairobi are very few in the various constituencies in this city. I think there's something that needs to be tackled holistically. I mean, I know the government has said they'll build a school at that site. They are going to give about 10 million shillings to build a school at that site. But I think that should have been done much earlier. And it should not just be a one-off reaction.
Yes.
It should be done throughout the city. Because reading the news, you say that the county government under the former governor Kidero actually commissioned a study. And there's a report existing about the education status in the city, which was done in 2014. That report needs to come out, be taken to the Ministry of Education, and see what can be implemented within that report. Otherwise, this situation where desperate parents end up taking their children to schools like this that are not fit for human occupation. And people still tend to think that children are light people. But when there are many, they are heavy. And definitely an unsound building will come down in a situation like that.
Right. Otene Molo?
Well, first of all, you've just had us handle that exhibit.
Yes.
And it is clear, as we were saying earlier, that there's a problem. That is, it's a slab made and reinforced by chicken wire. Chicken wire never reinforces slabs. But more importantly, even the chicken wire is of such a low gauge. They are always of different gauges.
Yes.
And the slab was clearly,
heavier than the...
Yes. So it was a tragedy that was bound to happen. But I must also warn you, Tibal, do you know what your reporter did and what you're exacerbating? Is that you're handling exhibits from a potentially criminal scene. So, and in giving it to all of us, you might just have all of us be invited to record evidence, and so we must be very careful. But now we didn't have a choice. We will just cite you as a source. Yes. But on a serious note, secondly, there are some observations you made earlier which I think are noteworthy. That, and I've checked this before, the entire Nairobi County, I think you said 205, but some of the records suggest there are about 225 public primary schools.
Yes.
That's a very low number. In Rarieda constituency only, we have 123 public primary schools. So if you compare that against the population of Nairobi with 225, it means we are bound to be in this kind of problem. And what we should examine is partly what Dr. Selly has alluded to. Part of the difficulties that our colleagues in Nairobi face is that whenever they want to put up a school, then they don't find the public spaces to put it up. Because the public spaces and public lands that were reserved for such had since been grabbed. So you end up in a situation where you have to buy the land. And buying land in Nairobi to put up a primary school is extremely expensive. And what this means is the Ministry of Lands and the Ministry of Education should review this and actually designate, at least in each constituency, 1 or 2 places which then are specifically earmarked for primary and secondary schools. We need to reduce these tragedies.
We need to. Let's hear from Dr. Selly.
I've had my take.
We're done the take. Let's hear from Aaron Cheriot.
It's like we had observed earlier on during the initial take that we had on this particular issue, Dibal, that perhaps you can shift the discussion today, though not so fast. Of course, we understand there's mourning to be done, but then there are answers to be given as well, from especially where there are lapses. And 2 very critical departments that will have answers for us are the City Inspectorate Department on who gave the approvals for such an institution, and perhaps it will be important to understand how many others of such are out there, how many other such buildings. You know, we've seen the pieces of debris that you've shared with us. That doesn't look even like a structure that, first of all, will be fit for human habitation. And it's really unfortunate if we continue year on, year out. I have never understood, and I know sometimes, and it's right for us to be criticized as leaders, because people expect that finally we'll have a solution. But sometimes we have done what is humanly possible to us as legislators. The law are in place. It is the enforcement bit of it that continues to give us a challenge. Otiende Amolo narrated to you how much they were able to do over that Huruma disaster. Then the proprietor ended up in court and they received an injunction against the Office of the Ombudsman. How far can you go after such issues? But before we get to that point of discussion, Dibal, it is important that the City Inspectorate Department gives us an answer on when this building was put up and who gave the clearance. If the clearance wasn't there, then who are the people that are in charge? And you are aware that City Inspectorate Department, if there is a department that has presence almost to every tiny village, for example, in the big cities, Nairobi included, it is this particular department. Even if you just wanted to put up a hanging line for your clothes in your house, they'll always be there with you and asking why you're doing any sort of construction. Therefore, it cannot be that this particular building was done without their consent. Somebody looked the other way, or they were paid to look the other way. Therefore, it is important we find out who. Secondly, Ministry of Education has also an inspectorate department that gives the pass on what can be a public school where people can, school kids can go to learn. The standards are strict for a public school. They are even more strict on a private school as this one. Precious Talent is a private school, and it is assumed that by the time somebody is putting up such an institution, they'll have met all the rigorous requirements of the law. And I know this because I have followed up registrations of schools in my county. I know that there's demand on the size of land that you have, the playfield that will be available for kids, the number of structures, number of students, and all that kind of thing. Therefore, it will be important to also get information from the Ministry of Education on, one, whether this school was registered, who registered it, and where are the minutes of the people that gave the approval. That is a good place to start. And if you can punish the people who gave those approvals, that is how you deter people. Because when people can no longer follow common sense and be responsible to respect what, you know, it's not for absence of good laws that we have the problems we have in our country. We have some of the best laws. We have the most progressive constitution in the continent. But unfortunately, we don't have a culture of respecting rules and regulations. That is where the problem begins, Dibal. And that will be a good place to start. For us that are in the legislature, of course it will be important for us, because some of these agencies, it is us who oversight them. City Inspectorate, for example, is a department of a county government, and it will be important, with consultations, of course, with the leaders from Nairobi, to understand what is it that those of us who sit in the Senate can be able to do about this particular department, perhaps press for answers from the governor and his administration. For the departments that are oversighted by National Assembly, say like Ministry of Education, it will be good to know, Sally, I don't know if you're a member of Education Committee. If you aren't, you have colleagues who sit there, to understand from them what were the criteria, who ticked the boxes on the requirements for registration on precious talent, and tell us what is it that they were seeing by the time they were ticking those boxes.
Right, Jacoy, I wonder if you may look at that Gazette supplement. I forgive my deficiency of, of knowledge, especially with this particular bill. Is it an act as it is right now, or is this physical planning bill? I think this was during also your tenure in 20.
That's an act. That's why it's gazetted.
It's an act right now.
By the time you see it, Dibal will help you with your knowledge.
Yeah, please.
By the time you see it being called Kenya Gazette Supplement,
yes,
that means it has been assented to.
It has been assented to. But what does it really encapsulate right now as the Physical Planning Act?
Well, Dibal,
in light of what we're going through, do we have something that we can pick from this particular act right now?
Well, like Senator Cheriot has said, the laws are there. Enforcement is lacking. And Dibal, I am wondering how an open and shut case like yesterday's tragedy would go for 24 hours before people are arrested. Really, this is where the government should have acted yesterday. I think to lessen the anger, the law must be seen to be working. The owner of that school needs to be in prison. The people at City Council who approved it ought to have been arrested. And I think I don't think it requires much debate. I think we need to mourn our lost children, but the government must act. The police must move in and arrest these people, because I mean, building a classroom with chicken wire is a serious thing. I mean, really, what more defense can we give to Kenyans? I don't think there is any proper reasoning. So I think the government must act.
Okay. Kimani Watangi.
Yes, Dibala, good morning, and let me say good morning to our viewers. And we never had an opportunity, me and Jacoyo, as we were kneeling and consulting there, to
you're not tired of kneeling every Tuesday?
To send our condolences to the families of the children who were lost yesterday. And let me say, Dibal, that it is an extremely sad day for this country. Yesterday and onwards, today, witnessing what has happened. But even more sadder, to know that this happened while so many people saw and knew that it was disaster that is awaiting to happen. And you know what has been concerning me since I've been following from yesterday, Dibal, and what's of concern to me is how we react. And I can affirm that now I believe we live in two different worlds. We have the society that lives in the upper, that knows nothing about what happens down there to the downtrodden,
yes,
and the downtrodden who only see us and those in the upper as two different worlds. And the reason I say this, Dibal, is while mourning seriously, I would be asking pertinently, what else are we expecting when we become ignorant of the plight of those that live under those circumstances? You know, Ngando village is not an extension of Karen, or neither is it an extension of Buruburu. This is where the lowest of the low in society lives. And I want to challenge, especially the authorities, after you are done with the lamentations that usually follow such a tragedy, pay a visit to Mukuru kwa Jenga. Pay a visit to Mukuru kwa Ruben, and go to Sinai village, go to other villages even in Kiambu, and see what difference is there with the existing institutions now that are there with what happened yesterday. I mean, if you go to some of these slum villages, if you go to places like in Kiandutu, in my own county, if you go to these villages here in South B, just next to urbanite dwellings, you find schools that have no escape route in case anything was to happen. Crammed with more than 2,000 children. Dibal, how many times have you screened here the immensity of the challenge of the school in Mwiki, where I remember you reporting that there are almost now 4,000 plus students, and ask if a disaster was to happen, and they're saying in one class you have about 120, sometimes even to 200 young pupils crammed in one class. What would happen? And that's what I'm saying. I think we need to turn this thing around. We cannot just be us waiting for this to happen and lament. I would want to be asking, for example, to the Education Ministry this morning, what happened after Changuli? I saw the other day in news running, and you ran this story in your own paper, that all those years and years after the Changuli tragedy, people are being compensated, parents, almost 20 years plus. And they're saying that they are happy to announce that every family has received 400,000 or 500,000 for the compensation of the loss of those young kids who were lost in Changuli in the fires. Ask yourself, after the spate of fires in almost so many secondary schools, what mitigating factors or strategies have been put in place today? If you went to the minister and asked them, because you saw this as a problem, and took the lives of so many young people when there were fires during those riots, what strategies have you put in place? Remember, in this discussion here, we were saying install CCTV coverage in secondary schools or in institutions of learning. You would ask, has there been a plan or a strategy or even an initiative to do that? Remember the tragedy that was here just in Moi Girls the other day, and we're saying this could have been prevented when a young child claims or had been raped. And so what I'm saying is this Dibal, the amount or number of similar tragedies waiting to happen is enormous. And recently, as the chairperson of the Committee on Roads, I paid a visit to a school in Orosirkon, just here in Kajiado. You just cross over from Rongai. Remember, the contractor there who is building the SGR railway line was a few weeks earlier in the news demolishing mansions and houses belonging to people who are waiting to be compensated hundreds of millions of shillings. A few kilometers down the line, I visited a primary school called Olosirkon Primary School, where a whole primary school, 13 classes, have been condemned by the public health officer in that area. Because, and I visited personally with my committee, there are cracks in the school right from the floor all the way up to the roof. And all of them condemned. Young children are learning under trees. Some of them, because the space out is not enough and they cannot learn under such harsh conditions, some of them are forced to occupy those classrooms. And I was asking the authorities and the contractor present, for goodness sake, what is it that you're doing? You have a contract worth 400 billion. What is this that you cannot construct a classroom for less than 20 million? And make sure that these people, even as part of CSR, that these young children, their lives are secured. And it becomes a ping-pong game. Even today, you find you write a letter to this one. We ordered, my committee ordered, that those young children should not step into those classrooms until the 9 classrooms are rebuilt. Because you can't have such a disaster waiting to happen and you're just watching. But you know, surprising, Dibal, that if you look at, for example, the correspondence that is between and our effort to make sure that is remedied, it's just a ping pong. And you'll be asking yourself then, what you see in the headlines is the fight to dethrone one another between NAT, between Sosion, are these the priorities? And lastly, Dibal, let me just summarize my thoughts on this one, because I believe it's a big issue. When we are fighting about the division of revenue, and we are saying, you know, reduce this and reduce this, allocate this to the Ministry of Defense, allocate these hundreds of billions to other priorities and build these highways, for goodness sake, what are we saying about such priorities? And though we may want to blame counties and county government, how much of resources are we saying? Because what I do not agree with as a leader is that the responsibility, especially for primary schools like those ones or schools which are in such establishments in the slum areas, can only be deemed to be the responsibility of the county government or the public health officers. What is the Minister of Education itself doing? I mean, those are Kenyans in that place. So if we just look at it and say we want to blame the city council, county government, inspector department, but then those people who are living in those slums, what do you expect them to do? They have children. It's a reality. They are living under those conditions. They do not have the capacity. Those children must go to school. So when somebody puts up a ramshackle, are you expecting that those parents will not take those kids to those schools? They will. They have no other alternative. And this is what we need to be saying, that we have to be realistic in the approach that we apply to look at the challenges that are facing our people. We cannot turn a blind eye or use either blame legislation, blame processes, blame inspectors when we have the solutions in our hands. I do not believe that in this country, when we have such conditions, that it is priority to go and buy new tankers and fighter jets. It isn't priority. It is more priority to allocate that money and assist to build those primary schools, even though they fall in the informal sector. That is the way you preserve the humanity and the humaneness of people. That is how you uplift society. But I think this other approach that we've been having of blame game doesn't solve our problems as a country.
But the question that it brings to the fore is, what do we use the CDF money for? You down on the ground, and of course you're a custodian also of devolution. Look at this particular picture. In comparison to what really happened in Dagoretti, this is Kibra. And this is a person who was focused, a visionary, beautiful school. But why were we having this dilapidated structure, with chicken scoop wires, holding the structure as well? These are questions that we need to be told by you, Eseli Simiu, the CDF that we have down in Mashinani and the wards. What do they normally do? If this can be, a good example of how we can actually maximize on these particular facilities. We take a short break right now. When we circle back, we'll continue with you, Eseli. Don't go away.